Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you can join us today for Maine's Case Manager Training Day 2, Tools for Case Managers. I'm Laura Malden, and I'm here with my colleague, Erica Andres. We are both senior consultants with Applied Self-Direction. Applied Self-Direction is an organization whose sole purpose is to advance self-direction programs, giving individuals of all ages and all types of disabilities more choice and control over their lives. I come from a financial management services or FMS background, and I'll just turn it over to Erica to introduce herself.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. As Laura said, I'm Erica, and I'm a senior consultant with Applied Self-Direction. I come from a lot of lived experience. I have muscular dystrophy, a form called spinal muscular atrophy, and I have been self-directing and living on my own for over, oh gosh, way too long, 25 years now. And but I also was an IRIS consultant, which is what in Wisconsin we call our case managers, for over 8 years, and I've been a support broker for about the last 2 years. Turn it back to you, Ms. Laura, to get things going.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erica. Okay, so today, the first thing we need to do is get our polls started. I think Nikki was going to bring those up. And while she's doing that, I'm just going to go through the rest of the agenda. We're going to talk about the self-direction workflow. So we talked about the various players in the self-direction program, and we'll put those together in an entire workflow. And then we'll talk about the self-direction services available as well as the spending plan. Next, we'll talk about how to introduce self-direction and how self-direction is really a shift in thinking. We'll discuss how to identify and mitigate gatekeeping, review some of your questions from the last training, and then have time for additional questions at the end. And oh, here we go. Here are the polls. So if those of you on the call today can respond to the polls, that would be great. The first question is, how comfortable are you explaining self-direction to members? Looks like responses are coming in. The second question is, to what extent do you understand your role as a case manager when offering self-direction services to members?
It looks like we have about 79% participating, so I'll leave it open for a few more seconds just for folks to be able to answer. Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, and then I have shared the results with everyone.
Okay, great. It looks like we have 60% saying they have a basic understanding of self-direction, and to case managers understand their role in self-direction to some extent. Okay, so let's move. I don't know if everybody can see it keep popping up on my screen, but let's get started on the workflow. So hopefully after this, you'll have a greater understanding of your role in self-direction, because now we're going to put all those pieces together. So this is self-direction, how to get started. So you'll notice that on this slide, there's 5 different columns. So we have a column for each of the roles, including you as the case manager. So the first role is the member and the member's representative. Next is the case manager, then the resource coordinator, the support broker, and the FMS provider. And as we go through this, you'll notice that each step is a different color. So the first one in blue is introducing self-direction. And you may remember from our last training that you as the case manager have a very important role in getting started in self-direction. So you'll be introducing self-direction as an option to members when you meet with them to discuss their needs and preferences. Part of this is using a self-direction exploration tool to determine their interest. If the member decides to self-direct, you'll be developing a person-centered plan with them, or a PCP. And you'll modify the PCP to include financial management services, support brokerage, and self-direction services. So that's the first step. That's the introduction to self-direction. The next step is the member, and if they have a representative that they're using, will review the independent support brokerage directory and review a list of FMS providers and select a support broker and an FMS provider. They might have questions about that, and so you can be available if they have questions about how to access the directory or where to review a list of FMS providers. Once they select their FMS provider and their support brokerage or support broker, as a case manager, you can update the authorization request to include the support broker and the FMS provider and send that authorization request over to the resource coordinator. The resource coordinator will review it, and if it's approved, they'll send approval to the support broker, the financial management services provider, and then the case manager. When you receive that approval as the case manager, you're going to request database access for both the support broker and the FMS provider. And the member will also receive that approval of the authorization request. So that's selecting the FMS provider. When the support broker gets their approval, they're going to review the PCP and pay attention to the waiver services that are going to be self-directed. Next, there's two steps that kind of happen simultaneously. And the first one that I'll review is getting started with the support broker. So the member can get started with self-direction, and the support broker in the first step is meeting with that support broker to discuss how self-direction works and their individual goals. They're going to determine if they would like the additional support of a representative. And if they do choose to have a representative assist them, then the FMS provider will conduct background checks.
We
The
can't
next step.
see your slides. Or at least
Really?
Yep. All I'm seeing is your beautiful office space and your double doors. Your little slide is up on the top, but it's not big. All we're seeing is you.
I can see getting started support broker easily.
You might,
No,
need-
I
It might be
can't
one of
know.
your settings.
yeah, you
Oh.
might need to change your view. If you go up in the top right corner, go to view, and then it will, say different side by side, speaker view.
Were you able to see it? And other people can see my slides okay?
I'm
I
good
can
now.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
You
we
don't want
can
to
see
try to look
Laura.
at these boxes any smaller than they already are. Thank you. Okay. So the member at this point has thought about if they want to have a representative assist them with self-direction, and then the FMS provider conducts a background check. So the next part of it is the member and the support broker take the information from the person-centered plan and they create a service implementation plan, or a SIP. And they complete this together. And then the support broker shares the SIP with you, the case manager. The SIP is going to be reviewed between you and the member, and the member needs to sign it, and it's attached to the PCP. So then the information from the PCP goes back to the support broker, and the support broker takes that information along with the allocation of resources from the ODES resource coordinator, and they meet with the member to complete a spending plan. And the spending plan contains the information about how the member is going to spend their self-directed dollars and the hours of service that they've been authorized. And we're going to go through the spending plan in a little more detail in the next set of slides. So I know that there were a lot of questions about that last time, so we'll give you kind of a high level overview of the spending plan. So the member and the support broker complete the spending plan tool together, and then they send a copy over to you, the case manager. And with that, you'll need, if there's any changes, you'll need to submit authorization requests specifically for any of the individual directed goods and services. Once those authorizations are approved, the FMS gets a copy of the spending plan tool to use as a base for any payments that it's making on behalf of the member. So now let's move over to the next slide. So the member is kind of that last slide was really how to get started with the support broker. This is how to get started with the FMS. So some of this can happen simultaneously as things are moving along with the support broker. The member also meets with the financial management services provider and receives enrollment paperwork, including in employer forms. So part of the enrollment paperwork is what to expect from being an employer, what the responsibilities are, how to hire an employee, what forms need to be submitted. They'll receive some employee paperwork, they'll receive a check schedule, and they'll receive background check forms. So they kind of get the overview of what to expect, any timelines that are needed. They can have the support broker attend that meeting if the support broker is requested there by the member, but the member gets to determine that. And then once they have that enrollment meeting with the FMS provider, the member can start to think about who they want to hire, and they can talk to their support broker if they need more tips about finding employees or how to hire employees. And once they have identified people, they can have their people submit background checks to the FMS provider. And so once the background checks are submitted, the FMS will reach out to say that either, once the background check is clear, they'll let the member know, and they'll make sure that all the paperwork has been submitted. So any of that's like general employee paperwork, so the W-4s, and any specific information forms that they need, any direct deposit forms, that type of thing. And so they'll let the member know that they're okay to have their workers start working, and they'll say, no, the worker's good to go. So then after it's kind of an extensive period at the beginning because you have to enroll with all the different services, but then the responsibilities over time are a lot smaller, and you'll see that there are less boxes because the information has been sent to the financial management service provider. So the FMS is going to make payments based on time entries that are submitted by the member. So the member's submitting time entries on an ongoing basis. The FMS provider is making payments based on those time entries. It's making payments for individual goods and services based on the spending plan and receipts that are provided. It's filing taxes on behalf of the member. The financial management services provider is creating spending plan reports. So listing the payments that the FMS provider has been making on behalf of the member on a regular basis. They're sharing those reports with the member, and then the member can have the support broker review those on an ongoing basis. If updates need to happen based on the member's needs changing, then the member can meet with the support broker to change the spending plan tool, which would then also the SIP would need to be updated, the PCP would need to be updated, authorization requests would need to be submitted. All parties are available for questions as they arise, but it really kind of gets into a steady state. If the member needs support around hiring new staff, if there's been a turnover, they'll go and the FMS would also run the background check, provide additional paperwork. The support broker can provide support around hiring because there, there is turnover over time. Let's see. Erica, I'm just going to ask you if there's anything that you noticed that you would mention in the steady state.
I do not, because
Okay.
frankly, this is your turn, your part, so I didn't really practice it, but there is a question. Can you please clarify about signing the SIP? That is something that is not currently being done for any other service. Is that a new task being implemented with self-direction? Do you know that? Do we know that?
I'm wondering if somebody from the state might know that. That was what I was told, is that the member would need to sign off on the SIP.
Oh, yeah. Yes, this is Derek.
Okay.
Hi,
go
Derek.
ahead.
Thanks.
I was going to say, yes, currently the member should be approving the service implementation plan, what the provider is submitting as their SIP. Even for traditional services, the member needs to be approving that plan. It's not a new requirement.
It's not,
Okay.
and also it's like, I'm wondering if there might just be some kind of misunderstanding of the language. There's not a place for a signature on the SIP. It is just simply a review with the case manager and the member, and a checkbox that says that they approve that.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
And then since we have both Angela and Derek here, then there's another question. Will self-direction be part of the lifespan waiver?
Yes. Individuals will be able to self-direct select services in the lifespan.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm going to continue. So additional responsibilities over time include health and well-being. So any allegations of abuse, neglect, exploitation, unexplained death, rights violations need to be reported in the reportable event system. So members should raise them to the case managers who would report them in the system. Support brokers and FMS providers also need to report any reportable events in the event system. If a member ends up going to the hospital, they should notify the case manager, and who would then notify the support broker and the FMS provider. The case manager should remind the member of this process annually. And then additionally, any reports of financial abuse, waste, or fraud should be raised to the Maine Care Services Program Integrity Unit by the member, the case manager, the support broker, or the FMS provider. And the FMS provider should be providing both the support broker and the member with information about this on an annual basis. So I know that's a lot of information, and we really want to make sure that you as a case manager understand your role in all of this. So I'm going to just go through your role specifically quickly so that you see this in a different way, because sometimes we know that this information can be processed differently. So as a reminder, you as a case manager are going to be the first point of contact to discuss self-direction with the member. You're going to inform the member that self-direction is an option for certain services, describe how self-direction works, including the roles of the representative, support broker, and FMS provider. The first piece is really completing that self-direction exploration tool to help determine if self-direction is a good fit. If it is, you'll want to inform the member of the program guidelines and their responsibilities. For the enrollment process, you'll be developing a person-centered plan with the member, which will include the member's needs, desires, and preferences. It's going to be completed with the identification of select services within combined limits as needed, and advise the member about the request for exception and ADA modification processes. You'll modify the PCP to include FMS and support brokerage and the services the member chooses to self-direct. And at this early stage, it's okay to not include the individual directed goods and services, because those will be added after the member creates their spending plan. As part of the enrollment, you'll assist the member to make an informed decision about choosing a support broker and an FMS provider. You're going to submit an authorization request for FMS and support brokerage and self-directed services. You'll request database access from the ODES resource coordinator for the support broker and the FMS. You'll review the service implementation plan with a member and attach it to the PCP. And as a reminder, the SIP is required for the self-directed employee support. So that's the home and community-based support. You'll help ensure the member and the support broker have the total cost of authorized self-directed services from the ODES resource coordinator. And you'll receive a copy of the spending plan tool from the member and the support broker. You'll submit any authorization requests to the ODES resource coordinators for the individual directed goods and services that are included on the spending plan tool, and then follow up to determine next steps if there are authorization requests that are approved or denied. And then over time, the case manager is going to assist with the management and changes to the traditional provider managed services. You'll modify the PCP and submit authorization requests on an ongoing basis as needed for the self-directed services changes, including the individual directed goods and services. You'll communicate with the member, support broker, and FMS, and continue to report all instances of fraud, waste, abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Okay, I know that was a lot, but we'll move on to the self-directed services and the spending plan. We could spend a lot of time talking about the spending plan, but we want to give you kind of a high-level overview so that you are a little bit familiar with it. One of the questions that we received after the last training was, how does the FMS come up with the budget? And it's really important to note that it doesn't, and this is an important separation of roles. The FMS receives a spending plan and makes payments only based on the spending plan, which is completed by the member and the support broker together. The ODES resource coordinator is going to provide the amount of services, and by that, I mean the hours per week of employment support and the total dollars available for self-directed services. The support broker and the member will take the amount that's provided by the resource coordinator and add it to the top of the spending plan. So then they use that to balance out the spending plan. And you'll see in a minute that the spending plan includes all the self-directed services and the maximums for each service type. Okay, so here is what the spending plan looks like. We've had some big screenshot snaps in here for you to see. Hopefully the print is big enough. But the top part of the spending plan is an overview. And remember, this is something that the member and the support broker are completing together, and then you'll get to see it in the end. So the member and the support broker are going to complete the green cells. And it does contain a lot of information, but each green cell has a number next to it over on the left. So in this screen, you can see 1 through 13, and this is the top part. So this is an overview of the spending. And at the bottom of the top part, you can see summaries from the lower section. So the total of flexible spending and the total of fixed spending. This has a lot of the personal information for the member, and it also shows you the date range in numbers 7 and 8. So this goes from January 1st through January 31st. It might be completed for a year, it might be completed for a partial year, and that really depends on when the services were authorized. You can see the total dollar amount authorized, which in this case is number 9, it's $74,006.40. And then the weekly hours of home support is 20, and the weekly hours of community support is 10. And when for that authorized amount, there were 12 months included in this authorization. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next. You'll see, actually, before I do that, you can see the total flexible spending that was included in the plan is $6,034.65. The estimated spending based on the information provided by the resource coordinator is that $6,146. So it balances it out, and there is a funds remaining in this spending plan. And then the fixed spending total is $12,388. So let's look at the following, a little bit about the next parts of the spending plan. So we have the employee costs. You can see that this includes both home support and community support. You can see that the member is going to, it's shown the minimum they can pay, which is the minimum wage, and the maximum they're allowed to pay, and they get to choose the rate they set in between the minimum and maximum. They get to choose for each employee the hours that the employee will work. And then the spending plan automatically calculates all the taxes that are associated with the hiring employees, and it shows the total weekly hours. There's some tax exemptions for family members, so those are included based on family criteria. But once again, this is something that the member and the support broker are completing. So it's more important for you to understand that this is there and know that the supports are there. It's also important for you to remember the member is not self-directing alone. They have the additional program supports of the FMS support broker, so those are also included in the spending plan. The FMS is included at a fixed cost of $125 a month, and then support brokerage is included based on what the member is planning that they'll need. So in this case, it's always $17 for 15 minutes. And in this case, the member has completed 8 units per month, and the spending plan does the math. Additionally, this has workers' compensation in it as well. The bottom part of the spending plan is the individual directed goods and services. They accrue monthly based on the employee hours of service with $10,000 as an annual maximum. And this is a part where we're hoping that those of you in the room can get involved. There must be some creative ways that members you've worked with have used their individual directed goods and services to meet their needs. Find an emoji and add it to the chat, or unmute yourself and tell us your example. Erica has an example that she was going to highlight while you do that.
Yeah, I've actually been able to use my individual directed goods and services to do a bunch of different things. For example, I have theater tickets to a theater here in town, and it pays my individual directed goods and services pays for my caregiver to go with me. And then I've also used it for a shower chair to get a special shower chair that my insurance didn't cover. I was able to use a grant from one of the independent living centers to pay for $2,000 of the chair. And then I only had to use $500 out of my individual directed goods and services budget to pay for the other $500. So I didn't have to ask for as much money. So there's a lot of things you can use that for.
Thanks, Erica. So one thing to keep in mind when items are added to the individual directed goods and services, they will need to be researched to make sure they can't be paid by other sources. So Maine Care, private insurance, organization grants, they might all pay. So it is, somebody asked last time if it was a payer of last resort, and in some ways, yes, that's correct, because you have to make sure they can't be covered by other sources. However, if you're curious if an item could be, it's worth exploring the member's needs and wants and adding it to the plan. And if you want to do the research, it's something that could be considered as a future item too. And there's ways to track that on the plan. The last part of the spending plan includes the fixed spending. So it has the other spending categories such as assisted technology transmission, home accessibility repairs and replacements, and home accessibility adaptations. It does have annual costs associated with each of those, except for the home accessibility adaptation has a maximum in 5 years. So it does list that maximum. And there's a way that it could be tracked on here if that makes the most sense for the member and the member's team. So just something to keep in mind. It's another resource for you. And let's see, when you're determining services, there we have some examples for you. Some of the eligible services would be home adaptations, might be a walk-in bathtub, grab bars, or a ramp. Assisted technology could be a Ring doorbell to see who's at the door, a smartphone with a keypad to unlock the door, or remote monitoring for doors to unlock, or a thermostat or water levels. Additionally, we have the community support, home support, and support brokerage. So different supports for the member. And then we have an example of how self-direction has been used. So, and this is an example, a local example from one of the case managers. So there's one member who lives full-time with her guardians who are retired and they travel often. The member does not mind traveling with her family, but prefers not to miss out on day program fun. For many years, the family tried to get respite services with no success. This meant when the family traveled, leisure or family support in another state, the member ended up missing weeks of the day program and time at events with their friends. This year, the family explored self-direction and now has 2 individuals who provide home support to the member at the member's home when her family is in another state. Because of self-direction, the member can stay in the area when she desires and do fun events like Special Olympics, bowling, and trips to Funtown with her friends. So that is a nice success story. We have another story that we want to share, and this is one of the first members. His name is Tommy Atkinson, and he was one of the first members who were self-directing through the Veterans Directed Care Program. And Tommy has Lewy body dementia, and so he needs help self-directing his own services. So his wife serves as his representative. Tommy has hired one primary worker who works with him full-time, and he has a really good relationship with his niece, and so he hired his niece as a backup worker as needed. So he also has goods and services available, and he uses funds to purchase items to assist him. He has case management services provided by his local AAA and uses its FMS to handle payroll. And so for Tommy, self-direction has been really helped enhance his life. Okay, I think I'll turn it over to you, Erica.
Sounds great, thanks. So as you know from the workflow, you will all be responsible for introducing self-direction to members. The way that self-direction is introduced will play a huge part in if the member tries it or not. So let's review some do's and don'ts of introducing self-direction. We're going to start out with some things that you should be doing when you're explaining self-direction. Please make sure you know what it is you're introducing. Hopefully, after Laura's amazing description that you guys just went through, you're ready to introduce and talk about self-direction like a pro. But if you paint self-direction as this big, scary picture, no one's going to choose it, right? So also make sure you're using person-centered language. As we talked about in the last training, use the language that the member wants. Make sure you're speaking directly to the member and no one else. Even if the member isn't the one answering you, make sure they are still included and respected. And also making sure you're highlighting the supports available to members. These include an authorized representative if the person chooses it, the financial management services agency, the case manager, support broker, and any informal supports that they have, including their friends, their family, and other community supports. Now for some don'ts. Please don't ever tell the member that self-direction is only suitable for certain populations, such as physically disabled adults. Self-direction can work for anyone with the proper supports in place. And it's also not for you to decide who self-direction is for. Please don't say that self-direction is a lot of work. I'm not going to lie to you, there are a lot of things involved in self-direction. As I said in the last training, sometimes I wonder if I still want to do it. But then I remember that traditional services are having just as hard of a time finding staff. In this way, I can hire a lot of non-traditional employees, like I told you about in the last training, my third shift factory worker who does self-direction on the side. Also, please don't give so much information in the first meeting that the member is so overwhelmed. It is vital to gauge the attention and comfort of the member. Don't give them every tiny little detail right away, because you're going to just see their eyes gloss over and you've lost them. And lastly, please never tell the member that self-direction is not right for them. Would you want someone else making life-altering decisions for you? No, I don't think so. And you might be saying, well, no, but I don't have a disability. I don't know if you do or not, because obviously I don't know any of you. But that's, but what is true is that every human being, regardless of their disability, cognitive function, or whatever, every human being has the right to make their own decisions about their own lives, period. When you're introducing self-direction, the following things need to be explained: how self-direction works, what services look like in self-direction, what services are needed and which to self-direct versus which not to, the need and the amount of hours, and then what's next when self-direction is chosen. Hopefully, between the workflow and the spending plan that Laura just went through, and the in-depth dive on what this case manager's responsibilities are, you will have the information to explain all of these things. When introducing self-direction, you and the member will be reviewing the self-direction exploration tool. The self-direction exploration tool is used to help members decide if they want to self-direct. It is not to help you decide if the member should direct. Again, that's not your decision. The self-direction exploration tool helps you get a sense of how much assistance the member will need. It can be helpful for a support worker also. It should be used as a starting point to get a conversation going on self-direction. It's not a full list of all the tasks that they will have to do for self-direction, but it is a place to start. It also may need to be administered in a different way. Remember that not everyone can hear a question and process it enough to answer. I can tell you that my feet might not be able to walk, but my mind wanders everywhere. By the third word on the first line, I would be thinking about the great dress or shoes or jewelry maybe that you're wearing, or what I need to do when I get home, and I'm not thinking about the question you just asked me. So just know that some people might need to see it in writing. Now, we're going to go through a couple of examples of how to introduce self-direction. So we're going to pretend that a case manager is asked about self-direction from a person who heard it through a friend. The response given is, oh, self-direction can be complicated, and there's a lot of paperwork. You live in such a rural area and have no natural supports, so there would be challenges finding someone to help you. You already have such strong connections to service providers who you have been working with for a long time. Are you sure you want to do that? So in the chat, I would love you to write down what you think was done well, and then what you think could be done differently in this example. So and we're putting it to work in this one. You guys might have, noticed that we have a lot more questions for you. So if anyone has anything that they think was done well, or anything that they think could be done better, that would be, just go ahead and write them in the chat. Bridget, there were many discouraging responses. Nothing seemed done well, right? I know I kind of over-exaggerated it, right? Like, I am positive none of you are ever doing this. I know that. And I just did it as a very obvious example to help you. So, seems a bit stilted towards a negative. Yep, exactly, Vincent. Great. And again, I am not out. Yeah, great. Exactly, Karen. Pointing out real life challenges is valid, absolutely, because it is going to be a little bit harder in a rural area, right? Boy, that's a tongue twister. But right, it seems likely they feel that the member has no ability to do these things. Exactly. So if we want to go into the next slide, guys, feel free to keep your answers coming, and you're coming up with some really great answers. So negative impacts of portraying self-direction this way, right? As people said, it could make the member worry, or it could make the member think they can't do self-direction, or the case manager think they can't do self-direction. It can make the member worry that the case manager will be mad if the member chooses self-direction, right? Like, the case manager tries to steer them away this strongly. But no matter what, it's really likely that the member is not going to look at self-direction, and definitely not choose self-direction if it's presented this way, which could just cause the member to miss out on a potentially empowering and life-changing experience. So let's try the second example. So if the case manager is asked about self-direction from someone, you could respond, "You want to learn more about self-direction? That's great. I'm a little new to self-direction too, so we are learning together. I've heard self-direction helps many people have more control over their life by allowing them to hire their own staff and to set their own schedules. You live in a rural area, so finding staff may be challenging. Luckily, you will also work with a support broker who can help you brainstorm people and places to look for workers. Let me give you a general overview of self-direction." So again, feel free to put in the chat, what did the case manager do well this time? And then is there anything you would have done differently? Much improved, right, Bridget? Exactly. Open the chat here real quick. And again, please understand that I did these very exaggerated. I'm pretty sure you're not going to, say this like 14 words or 14 sentence introduction, but just I'm sure you guys are, yes, being much more positive. Again, acknowledge that it's a new service and they're learning well. It's much more supportive and much more encouraging, right? So yeah, they did portray self-direction in a much more positive light. They did, as somebody said, pointed out that it can be challenging in a rural area, but that there are still supports available. So it's really great. And then, yeah, and then learning together, right? Focusing on that. So this one's just a little bit more supportive attitude, a little more positive attitude, a little more like, hey, let's learn it together. I might be new. Because you know what? It's okay. I mean, when I first started being a risk consultant, I was brand new. And I got 35 people partnered with in one day. That's terrifying. And then you're making all those introductory calls. And it's okay to say like, hey, you know what? I'm new to this, but we're going to learn together. And I'm going to, make sure that you get what you need. So, all right. Now, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about how self-direction requires a shift in thinking. Before we start, I just want to say, though, that I am not trying to offend anyone. Someone in the on the last survey commented that the last training was disrespectful to you guys as providers. In no way, shape, or form am I trying to be disrespectful. I think I'm not actually sure what part it was, but I'm thinking it was maybe the avoiding pitfalls and things like that. So I am sure that you guys are working in a person-centered approach and using person-centered language at all times. I'm just trying to bring up some things that have happened to me in my life, or things that I've heard, or things that some other friends have brought up. And I've just seen it, so I want to help you guys avoid it. Again, I don't think you're doing it. I just want you to know what some things can happen so that we can avoid it. Okay? So let's first talk about gatekeeping. If I haven't made this clear already, which I'm pretty sure I have, self-direction should be offered to everyone, no exceptions. Unfortunately, gatekeeping happens when a case manager decides the self-direction is not right for a member, so they don't even offer it, or they portray it in a negative way. Remember, the decisions about a member's life should be made by the member. Some examples of gatekeeping include presenting self-direction as a last resort, or saying something like, well, let's try this agency first and see how it goes. And we can move on if self-direction doesn't, or if we can move on to self-direction if that doesn't work. Or framing self-direction as too complicated, like, oh, that's so much work and so hard, and it's so much to do. You don't want to do that. Or believing that self-direction is only for high-functioning individuals. I once heard someone say that offering self-direction to someone that doesn't understand their own finances is definitely got to be setting them up for failure. I wondered how, though, because finances have nothing to do with being able to choose the people that come in and out of your home. Finances is what the FMS is for, actually. Heck, as I told you in the last training, I can barely do my own online banking, but I sure can interview workers and see who I want to hang out with throughout the day. And then the FMS and the support broker will help with other things. And then thinking things are okay, so why rock the boat? Kind of like what we were talking about in our last example of introducing self-direction. But like we just talked about, why not at least offer it and let the person choose what they want? Case managers should understand the benefits of self-direction and advocate for that model. This will help members feel more comfortable. Now that you know a little bit about what gatekeeping is, let's talk about how to avoid it. Instead of assuming, just ask, right? Just ask how the people feel about it. When in doubt, ask the member and their circle of support before assuming their capabilities. Tell them about self-direction and ask if they'd be interested in it. Be aware of your biases and make sure to work to overcome them. And then respect the member or their representative as the employer, because the FMS nor the case manager are the employer. A few questions on the survey last week were about worker selection and oversight. This is probably an area where traditional case managers struggle the most. You want to know who's going to look out for the member. Well, the answer is the member. The member is going to look out for the member, but also the rep, the support broker, the FMS, and you as the case manager will be there to help. The member will get to choose who they spend their day with. We have all had that annoying coworker. Imagine if that coworker that was so annoying is the person that you spent all of your time every day with. Well, self-direction makes it so that members don't have to spend time with somebody that they don't like. So some basic worker requirements are just that the person must be 17 or older. They must complete the rights and behavioral regulations for people with developmental disabilities class. They can't be the guardian only if the guardian is the representative, but otherwise it is open to whoever the member chooses. And then the member or the representative are the employer. So they'll decide who to hire. They will decide on training. They'll train on what's important to the member, not the required trainings that some places require, and that often don't pertain to the worker. Tell the truth right now. If you were teaching this training, you might do it differently, right? You might focus on other things. So every person that is able to train themselves focuses on what's important to them. Managing is also up to the member and or the representative. They will choose what daily documents they want filled out, if any, because I'm going to tell you right now that just because forms are filled out and boxes are checked doesn't actually mean that things were done. The member or the representative also decides if the worker should have any certifications. Here's the thing, for me, first aid and CPR was one of the things that people wanted to know if I was required. But the thing is that CPR and first aid won't help me. I have a rod in my back that goes from my shoulder blades down to my pelvic bone. You could not do the Heimlich maneuver on me. You would end up breaking my back. So I then trained my workers on how to help me and how to get to do it or what to do if I am choking. I'm going to go out on a limb and say someone who isn't okay with personal touching or people being in their personal space also probably couldn't have the Heimlich maneuver done on them. So they would be able to train you on how to safely help them. And honestly, just because someone sat through a CPR or first aid class a year ago doesn't mean they're going to actually be able to help me in an emergency anyway. To help with the shift in thinking, let's talk a little bit more about what's important to versus important for. So things that are important for the member are things that keep the member healthy. Things that are important to the member are people, places, and or routines that make the member happy. For example, taking medications daily is important to the member because it helps them reduce the risk of having a seizure or a behavioral health incident. However, volunteering regularly at the church group is important for the member. Important to the member, because it helps build the community connections and meaningful relationships. And it also helps the member make a positive impact on their community. So it's really easy to only focus on what's important for the member, like taking medications, eating healthy, things like that. But things that are important to the member are just as critical. And self-direction can help encompass both of them. Self-direction is also very empowering to members. So here's a few tips on how to empower members. Reiterate to the member that they are the boss and they're in charge. Also reiterate that the person-centered plan is their plan. Encourage members to ask questions. When a member has a question, help them find and use resources to answer that question. Don't just provide an answer because it won't help with them learning. If you tell the person where or help the person find the answer, then they'll know for next time when they have a question. When the member asks what should be done, ask the member questions such as, how do you feel, or what do you think? What are some possible solutions that you can think of? And then you can review the solutions with the member. And always provide positive reinforcement to members when strides are made. Speaking of empowering, now we're going to talk about doing for versus doing with versus teaching. So let's say we have the task of choosing what services to self-direct. In a doing for model, you would talk with the member, but then the case manager would decide which services they thought would be best to self-direct. In a doing with structure, the case manager would talk to the member, and then the case manager and the member would decide together which services are best. But if you're doing teaching, you and the member would talk about each service, talk about the pros and cons of each service, and then let the member decide which services to use. Another example would maybe be choosing a support broker, like Laura was just talking about. In a doing for model, the case manager would talk to the member, maybe talk to the support broker, learn a little bit more about them, and then the case manager would decide which support broker would be a good match for the member. In a doing with model, the case manager and the member would review the list of support brokers. Maybe the case manager would know a little bit about some support brokers, so they would share the knowledge they have. And then they would come up with questions to ask each support broker. And then the member in this case manager would call the support brokers together and get the answers. In the teaching model, again, the case manager and the member are going to review the list of all the support brokers. Again, probably the case manager is going to tell anything they know about each support broker, positives or negatives. And then they're going to come up with some questions for the support to ask the support broker. And then maybe the case manager would do 1 or 2 calls with the support brokers, but then would allow the member to do the rest of the calls on their own. So we're going to shift gears again and talk now a little bit about recognizing and navigating bias. Laura and I have talked a little bit about bias in the last training and in this training, but now we're going to go into a little more detail. First, we're going to start with an activity. Laura's going to put up a picture, and I want you to count how many triangles you see and share that number in the chat. I'm going to leave it up for just a few seconds. If you can put in the chat how many triangles you see. We got
I
7.
left it up for a few seconds.
Yeah.
If I need to put it back up, let me know.
Got 11, we got 7. We got numbers all over the board. You guys are very good at doing participant support today. Thanks, guys. So I'm not just standing here staring, talking to myself. So those of you, Laura, if you want to put the picture back up, those of you said 0, you are the winner. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Laura. So there are no full triangles in this picture. Our brain completes an incomplete picture to fill, yay, Heidi, to fill in the lines and make it easier for us to learn and comprehend. We see what we want. But unfortunately, the same adaptive ability of our brains can become an obstacle to seeing the world as it really is. So you guys, look, there are actually no complete triangles, right? So consciously or unconsciously, part of why you saw triangles was due to the ladder of inference. So we're going to go through the ladder of inference. The first step, I did ask how many you see. That's right. I guess I should have said how many are there, right? So the first step in the ladder of inference is observing data and having experiences. For this example, we're going to say I met a person who has a developmental disability. Her name's Sarah. So that was my data, and I'm having experience. I select data from what I observed. So when I meet with Sarah, she asks me a lot of questions, and I sometimes have to explain the answer more than once. Sometimes it can be difficult to understand Sarah, and I have to ask her to repeat herself a few times. So then I add meanings, both cultural and personal, to the data. So I decide that because she has to ask a lot of questions, she has limited cognitive abilities, I presume she's incompetent, she's unable to navigate the world. I make assumptions based on the meanings I add. So I'll need to simplify things for her. I'll need to protect Sarah. She will not be able to navigate the world alone. I draw conclusions, which my conclusions may be it's a complicated program. She won't be able to fully self-direct. It's going to be more work for me. She'll definitely need a representative or somebody to help her. I then adopt beliefs about the world. She's going to need more help. My role is to make this work as effectively and efficiently as possible. So then I'm going to take actions based on my beliefs. I make decisions for her. She has traditional services already. Things are going okay. So I'm going to just say she's going to stay with them. I'm not even going to present self-direction. Or I can tell Sarah that self-direction is there, but it requires that she has a rep because she's going to need that anyway. So we don't want to be doing things like that. We don't want to be, taking in data and just changing because what we think is happening. So if we talk about the ladder of inference, we notice our values and beliefs are important in the actions we take. Laura, if you can switch the slide for me, thank you. The definition of value, I'm sure you guys know, is a person's principles or standards of behavior. It's one's judgment of what's important in life, right? We all know what our values are. And then the belief, which I'm sure we all know, is something one accepts as true and real, and it's a firmly held opinion or conviction. So as I said, values and beliefs influence our actions, both positively and negatively, unfortunately. So if you know someone who's disabled and they've led a fully independent, successful life, you believe that anyone can probably self-direct. I hope that all my friends and family and people that know me know that self-direction is a great thing and it should be offered to everyone. But however, if you've maybe never met or known any disabled people, you might believe that all disabled people need to be protected. I cannot tell you how many people in my life, right, come up to me, talk to me like a child, treat me like a kid, pat me on the head, because maybe they've never actually met someone before in their life who's disabled. I actually had somebody tell me that it was nice to see me out and about because I'm generally locked away, or why would you say that? So it's just definitely in your values and beliefs and what you know. So we need to make sure that we're paying attention to our values and beliefs to ensure that they're not negatively impacting the members that we help, right? We also have to ensure our biases are not negatively impacting the members. So we're going to talk a little bit about bias right now. We're going to start with explicit bias. So explicit bias is conscious attitudes that result in deliberate and calculating behaviors. So, for example, the member doesn't use words to communicate, so you consciously talk to the caregiver or someone else instead of the member. Or if we have a case manager who decides that the family or spouses are taking advantage of the program by being paid to help the member. Well, I have to say that my boyfriend, my best friend, and my mom are all workers for me. They should be paid to help me. It shouldn't be expected that just because they love me, they should give me a shower, they should take me to the bathroom, they should dress me or do other things. That is way above and beyond what a friend, a boyfriend, and even a parent does for a grown adult. I'm going to go out on a limb and say my boyfriend thinks that putting on makeup for me is way above his job duties as my boyfriend. But if I put them on my payroll, I also get to boss them around and they have to listen to me. So it's not taking advantage of the system. It's just making sure that my needs are met. Now, on the contrary, implicit bias is associating stereotypes or attitudes towards categories of people without conscious awareness. The without conscious awareness is a huge part because you aren't actually doing it on purpose, but it can still result in making assumptions about a person's capabilities or desires. For example, assuming that all developmentally disabled people are not able to do self-direction or need a guardian or representative to do it. Some more examples of bias are assuming that self-direction will be too hard for a certain member, or that the member can't self-direct because of a certain disability that they have, or a representative will definitely be needed for someone to self-direct, or the member will be taken advantage of in self-direction, or that the case manager knows what's best for the member. Really, the member is the only person who knows what's best for them. And also that the case manager knows the member's capabilities. If you've worked with someone for a very long time, you do probably know what they can do, but if you don't let them try new things, you're not going to learn if they can do it. Now that you know what bias looks like, let's talk a little bit about how to mitigate bias. Be aware of your bias so that you can work through them. Everyone has biases. I hate to tell you that. But the best case managers will work to identify these and address them. I'm going to be very honest with you guys and tell you that when I first started working with people with Down syndrome, I thought they were so sweet and so cute. Well, that's really degrading to adults with Down syndrome, right? They are adults, and no one wants to be called sweet and cute when you're an adult. Trust me, I get called it all the time. Early on, I had a participant who had Down syndrome. She called me out on it. She asked me why I get all smiley when I see her, and I talk in this really high-pitched and sweet little voice. She said I hurt her ears and I needed to knock it off. Honestly, I gotta tell you that I didn't even realize I was doing it. I had to train myself not to talk to her like that. I had to educate myself on the roots of my bias. Like, why did I all of a sudden talk like this when I was talking to her? Well, the reason is because my friend had a 2-year-old with Down syndrome, and I had known her since her birth. So she was a baby, and I was talking to her like a baby. But then I unfortunately carried that over to this adult with Down syndrome. So I had to actively work to engage my feelings, even though it was uncomfortable, right? I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I had to approach feedback with curiosity instead of defensiveness. So when she told me that my voice was hurting her ears and I needed to knock it off, instead of trying to be defensive and explain why I was doing it, I had to just fess up and say, oh my gosh, you're so right. I'm so sorry, and I will not do it again, right? If your bias is culturally based, actually just try to learn a little bit more about the culture and the values of the people you're supporting. I also have to tell you that when I first started working with people in Irish, I thought that all Russian people were kind of crabby, only because I think their language is a little bit harsh sounding sometimes. Now, I worked with several people who were Russian over my many years being an Irish consultant, and they were truly the nicest, most caring people I'd ever talked to. I told my members that I thought they were crabby because of their language, and they mostly just laughed at me. Also, please don't think I'm a horrible person because I've now told you what biases I've had in the past. Trust me, I was very, very young when I had all of these, and I've learned a lot, and I hope that I can help you guys learn too, although I'm sure you probably don't think these things. But also, just make sure to ask questions. If you're wondering about something or you don't know something, feel free to ask. However, keep in mind that keep the questions to only things that will help you do your job better. As disabled people, we have to tell our life story all the time for so many different reasons. And it's important that you're only asking questions that will actually help you with your job, not just because you're curious. As case managers, you will also need to be aware of cultural barriers to supports and services. For example, the historical mistrust of healthcare, mental health, education, and social services professionals. When I was an Irish consultant, so many people were afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing or saying something to make them lose their services because of all the terrible experiences they had had in the past. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the systems in the United States. Let's be real. Navigating the world of long-term care can be so confusing. I don't even know what's going on half the time. Unfortunately, in 2023, racism, discrimination, and bias are still a problem. People face racism and discrimination from social service professionals and other healthcare professionals. Belief about the meaning of disability and stigma go together. Some cultures have a lot of stigma and shame around disabilities, especially around mental health diagnoses. So people don't always want to admit that they have disabilities. There is a lot to read and a lot to understand in long-term care programs also. So I don't even always understand it. And some people who use the program have low literacy or at least low health literacy. And if English is not your first language, this program can be very hard to understand. Self-direction does help address some cultural barriers though, because with self-direction, members can hire anyone they want. For example, someone with the same culture, who speaks the same language and knows how to cook food they like, or someone with the same customs or routines, who understands the struggles of the culture, and someone with the same or at least probably similar values and beliefs. So that's the end of our prepared training we have. We're now going to move on to some questions that you brought up on the survey last week that we're going to answer for you. Many of you brought up concerns about discussing self-direction with your members because right now, support brokerage is not to the level that your members need and what you want for them. Well, I have some exciting news. If I was a drummer, I'd play you a drum roll. But we are working with the state of Maine to recruit independent support brokers. Yay! Independent support brokers are individual people who will hopefully have experience with disabled people, or at least the system that they're working in. They will not work for the FMS. We're looking for people who truly care about helping others. We're working on recruiting people and making a certification process for support brokers. The independent support brokers will work one-on-one with members. We are currently holding info sessions in November, actually next week, December and January. And we're recruiting from different places, such as colleges, local organizations, and independent living centers. We really want other disabled people in the role of independent support brokers because peer support has shown to be very successful. I'm going to tell you that whenever I rolled into a new participant's home and they saw me in the wheelchair, they just seemed to relax a little and realize that they were going to get the straight answer and they were going to get it from somebody who truly understood. But if you have any other ideas of where to recruit for independent support brokers, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Also, if you know anyone that would be a great support broker, please feel free to let them know about the info sessions coming up. Other questions came up about members with limited supports. As we've reviewed, there are a lot of other built-in supports in self-direction. So even if they don't have outside supports, there's still the FMS, the support broker, the member could get a representative, you as the case manager are there to help, and that employer handbook that we talked about a little bit in the last training. The employer handbook is kind of a how-to guide on self-direction. It's how to be an employer, what services there are, how to answer all different questions. We kind of put it in the form of like, this is my question, here's the answer. Also, there are community supports that people could get. So we have faith-based organizations. Maybe the member, if they're interested, could join a church, and then the pastor or other people in the church could help. Or maybe age-related organizations. We have the aging resource centers. There's also a lot of senior centers in Maine, I know. And then disability-related organizations. For example, I work through the Muscular Dystrophy Association. There's the MS Society. There's autism networks. There's dementia organizations, things like that. And then personal supports. Even if they don't have any family, maybe they have neighbors or community members or places they go to all the time. And then also in Wisconsin, we have what's called a lead caregiver. So basically in Wisconsin, if someone had limited natural supports, and they needed extra support, they could promote one of their workers to do extra duties. So maybe the worker would get another $1 an hour, and they would then help the member with extra things. So that lead caregiver would still obviously make the amount that's within the guidelines of how much they can make, but they make a little bit more, and then they helped with scheduling the other workers at the place. They would help with recruiting and interviewing and hiring workers. They also then helped find fill-in workers if someone called in, or they would maybe fill the shift themselves. So that's another option for someone who maybe doesn't have, a lot of outside supports. As the case manager, it is not your responsibility to help members find workers. Sorry, Laura, were you going to say something?
No, I wasn't. I was just throwing my phone across the room because my alert was coming off that school's over and things were happening. So I was getting it out of the way. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. We're just making sure. As the case manager, it's not your responsibility to help members find workers, but many of you asked about it. So I'm just going to do a quick review. Some online sources are, care.com, City, Craigslist. I know I said Craigslist and you all probably cringe because, we've heard so many bad things, but I can honestly tell you that I've found some of my most amazing workers on Craigslist. But there's also Indeed. All of those things do cost money though, and depending on that could be a problem. So there are some free ways to do it. You can post a flyer on Facebook. A member could post a flyer on Facebook and then ask their friends and family to share it. In Wisconsin, we have local rummage sale or local information sites. So for instance, I live in Oak Creek. So I post a lot of my flyers on the Oak Creek information board, and that's how I found probably 5 out of the 7 routine caregivers I have that's how I found them. And then Marketplace also has an employment section. And then something else you guys might not have ever heard of, it's Handshake. It is the way to get to all the colleges in the country. Unfortunately for Handshake, you do have to have a business address. You can't use like a Gmail account or something like that. Lucky for me, my boyfriend happens to be a computer programmer and he made me a website. So I have a website that I can use for that. Some other community resources are maybe hanging flyers at a local gym. I had a friend that went to a pole dancing class and did a little presentation because she decided if the people could hold themselves up on a pole, they sure could lift her and move her around. So I thought that was pretty genius. People can go to local coffee shops and post flyers, maybe a guitar store, really just use the members' interest. If they're interested in different things, try to find a place that would attract those people. Obviously colleges. And if there isn't a lot of physical care involved in the members' needs, maybe even senior centers, because a lot of retired people are looking for something to do to fill their time. But I always say the #1 way to help find people is to carry business cards with you and network with you. I have a little tiny business card that I carry with me. It just has a picture of my bright, shiny face, and then the website that, my computer programmer boyfriend created for me. And then also a link to a Google form that they can fill out and say if they're interested. Again, another benefit of living with a computer programmer. But I have handed that business card out and hired people that were my worker at a restaurant, a person I sat next to at the bar, the teller at the bank, the cashier at the local grocery store. Even if you have members who don't go that many places, like maybe you say, oh, they don't go out. Well, you know what? They probably took an accessible van to get to one of their doctor's appointments. Maybe that person that was the van driver would want to do it. Or maybe the person that checked them in at the doctor's office is looking for some part-time hours. Really just anywhere the member goes, they could think about the people that they meet and who they could hire. Also, people ask for examples of developmentally disabled people self-directing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Yvonne and Lucy. I know that you're not supposed to have favorites when you're doing case management, but Yvonne and Lucy were definitely 2 of my favorites. You couldn't really meet them and not love them. Yvonne and Lucy were best friends. They both were abandoned by their family and put into an institution early in their lives. They were roommates in the institution from childhood all the way until they moved out of the institution and into their own apartment at the age of 50 and 52. They both have developmental disabilities, and they had a guardian who was very nice but very uninvolved. She lived over an hour away from Yvonne and Lucy. They were lucky enough to move into a very supportive community, though, because as I said, you couldn't meet them and not love them. So luckily, they love to talk. So creating a plan was very easy. They just talked and talked, and we were able to kind of pull out what kind of services and supports they would need. They ended up with a worker that came into their home 3 to 4 times a week for about 5 hours each time. During that time, the worker took care of all their shopping needs, like took them to the grocery store, to Walmart, to all of those places they needed to go. She took them to doctor's appointments, helped them run errands, and do all those things. During that time, she also helped pay their bills and then gave them spending money for the week or for the few days until she would be back. She also did daily living skills training with them to make sure they were doing things like thoroughly bathing, dressing in weather-appropriate clothing, and doing effective cleaning. And then she also worked on meal prep and meal planning with them. When she wasn't around, we had some technology in there to help. We had a medication dispenser that provided reminders for them to take their medicine and then actually dispensed it in the doses that they needed so they could take it. We got them a Ring doorbell, as Laura talked about, so they could see who was at the door. We did a lot of training at the beginning on stranger danger, right? And at the beginning, we actually even put in a code word. So if people didn't know the code word, then Yvonne and Lucy wouldn't talk to them. And that was for the phone and the door. We made sure that they always asked, what's my code word? They thought it was pretty cool, actually, that they had a code word to get into their apartment. And we also made sure they had a keypad for their door because they lost their keys all the time. And we were afraid that somebody was going to get in that shouldn't. So as I said, they also had a great community that would help them. So they had a little corner store that they could walk down to during the day, and that's usually what they spent their spending money on. And people at the store, the people who owned it, made sure that they weren't paying too much and were paying the right amount for all the little treats that they bought. And in reality, they generally didn't pay anything because some neighbor who loved them would come up and pay for their items. So they thrived living out of the institution and with self-direction. And the members you can support can also thrive with self-direction. So I have now talked for a long time. I'm pretty sure you're sick of hearing me talk. So I'm gonna hand this over to Laura.
Erica, I could listen to you talk all day. So hopefully everyone else on the phone could too. So now we're going to move on to talking about designating a representative. So as Erica mentioned, even if you think somebody might need a representative, it's not up to the case manager to decide. But some members don't have the capacity to self-direct alone, and it will apply in cases of full guardianship. If they can't self-direct alone and they would like the assistance of a representative, and a guardian may designate a representative, or they might serve as one, but they can't. Just remember that a guardian cannot be the worker if they're a representative. A representative will work with the member to develop the person-centered plan and assist with all the employer duties, attending meetings, reviewing reports, tracking spending, just keeping things in line and helping the member with the duties that the member would like assistance with. We wanted to mention a few things about guardianship. When some members do have guardians, and it's important, some of the members who have guardians might not use words to communicate. So when you're working with members who don't use words to communicate, make sure to use their method of communication to ensure the member's wants, needs, and desires are still heard. So if it's somebody might focus more on eye contact, even if they don't speak. Just try to have that connection with the member and still talk to the member specifically when doing the person-centered planning, even if they do have a guardian. Make sure you're building that connection and trying to determine the member's specific needs. If there's a disconnect between the guardian's desires and the member's desires, try to find a compromise. Sometimes their desires are different, and it's important to figure out that common ground in the middle. We did receive one additional question that we just wanted to raise, which was, how much extra work does this mean for case managers? So as we talked about with the workflow in the beginning, there's a lot of additional information and processes to learn. However, and all of this will be outside of what you're used to doing, because it does take time to learn the new and energy to learn the new processes. But once you become familiar with the flow, you'll learn that there are many other people in self-direction to support the member and support you throughout the process. So the member can be successful in living their best life. Okay, so we still have some time for questions. We went a little bit longer than we were anticipating.
Well, actually, Derek has done a fabulous job of answering questions in the chat. So thank you so much, Derek. Two of the questions though are if these slides will be available, and they will be available. And you will have them from both trainings and the workflow, little pictures that Laura so effortlessly went through also will be available. So, okay, and then Heather, I see your hand up.
Heidi does.
Oh my gosh, I cannot.
Heather, there is a Heather on here, but I don't see her hand.
I had the little question and answer box right over, so I just saw HE and just assumed your name.
That's okay. That's okay.
It.
So actually, probably Derek's going to answer this. So if an individual is on the wait list for 21, they have 29, then they do the self-direction, then poof, magically, they've been offered a waiver on 21. So they would have to get rid of self-direction in order to take the section 21. Or having self-direction and on waiting for a section 21, would they have to come off that wait list? Am I making sense here?
Yes. Yep. This is Derek. So if So self-direction is only currently available in section 18, section 19, section 20, and section 29. So if a person is self-directing on section 29 and they receive a slot to begin services on section 21, once that person begins services on section 21, they can no longer self-direct because section 29 ends and they'll begin section 21. If the person is on section 29 and they're self-directing, but they're still on the wait list for section 21, they can continue to be on that wait list for section 21.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. That helps a lot.
And then we have another question. Can self-direction be used to help someone have transportation on call? Like a person they feel safe riding with, they can do on call for a ride support in places when they desire.
Yes. So if a person has, we always encourage, if it's appointments to a medical appointment, that the person use non-emergency transportation. But for any other transportation, you could develop a transportation plan where you're hiring people who would be vendors for the FMS that could transport you.
Thanks, Derek.
Mhm.
Any other questions? This is your chance. You get Derek and Angela right here. Answer all those questions for you.
We're here too.
Oh, we have a question. Can a member have self-direction and community support services through a center? That's
So.
Well,
this
self-directed
kinda came up-
services,
Go ahead, Laura.
well, I
came
was
up the
gonna
other
say
day.
that self-directed services would be independent of a center, so they could have services, they could receive home support, or they could receive non-self-directed services through a center, or they could have home support and community support through self-direction. So those are two different things. Does that answer your question? Do you have any follow-ups?
yes, thanks.
Good.
Okay. Any other questions?
And you guys don't have to put it in the chat. Like, feel free to just unmute and blurt it out.
That's fine too.
Any other questions? Oh, I've heard a lot of questions about budgeting for goods and services. If a member chooses to pay their caregivers a maximum amount, will they have money left for goods and services? Ooh, I know Laura can-
Yes, they will. They'll definitely have money left for goods and services, because that's the way that goods and services were developed as part of their spending plan. So there's always going to be a delta between the amount of money that they pay their employees and what's being earned towards the goods and services dollar, but they do accrue monthly, so it will be built up over time towards that $10,000 annual maximum.
And then a question of, can someone who has a guardian be their own manager? Well, if they are under full guardianship, the guardian would have to be the employer, but hopefully the guardian and the member would have a great relationship and they could still be in the driver's seat and be the manager. But technically the guardian would have to be the employer of record.
Great answer, Erica. But the guardian could appoint an authorized representative to support the member too.
And then they could be the worker.
So another question, would the guardian be able to be staff?
So that's what Derek was just alluding to.
Yes.
If the guardian
Mm.
appoints a representative to be the employer of record, then they could be the worker, the staff.
Correct.
We commonly see this with families that are living together, where the one of the parents may be guardian, and so the other parent becomes the employee of the member.
All right, we have about 3 minutes left. Are there any more quick last minute questions you thought of?
There was a question in the Q&A about, does that go for ODES guardians? So yes, an ODES guardian could also choose an authorized representative.
Well, it seems like the questions are slowing down, and hopefully that's because we have answered every question that you could ever have now. We're gonna pop up a quick little poll at the end again to see if we've done our job and to see if we have helped you with everything we can. So if you guys could just complete that really quick, that'd be great.
Great, we have a little bit over 75% participating, so I'll leave it open for a few more seconds for folks. Right, last chance to respond. And I will post the results.
So good to see that most people have been intermediate or advanced. At least a basic understanding or an intermediate or advanced understanding of self-direction. And I'm so glad to see, thanks to Laura, that everyone has an extent that a case knowledge of the case manager to a large extent or to some extent. That's wonderful. Yay, Laura.
No, that has to do with you too, Eric. You provided a lot of really helpful information.
It's a very good presentation. Thank you very much.
You bet, everyone.
1 minute questions, going once, going twice.
And if you do think of any others, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely, happy to help. Oh, I saw something pop up. What was that? If there are no other non-paid providers, will ODES be the representative? Oh, Derek is typing away.
Not sure of the questions, so maybe we can connect later, because I do have a hard stop at 3 p.m. that I'm late for, but I will get back to you if you can send us an email.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.